The concert was halfway through. Everyone was waiting for the next solo. But Ace Frehley stopped playing, stepped back from the microphone, and without a single word, did something that froze everyone who saw it. Detroit. Cobo Hall. March 1977. 12,000 people packed into an arena that smelled like beer and cigarette smoke and sweat. The stage lights were hot. The amplifiers hummed with that low electric buzz that sits just under the threshold of hearing. Kiss was 3 songs into their set, the crowd already at fever pitch. Ace Frehley stood stage right. Silver platform boots. Black leather. The Les Paul hanging from his shoulders like it had been there his entire life. He didn't move much when he played, never had. While Gene Simmons stalked the stage and Paul Stanley worked the crowd and Peter Criss hammered away at the drums, Ace just stood there and played. That's what he did. He played. The song was Shock Me. His song. The one he wrote. The one where he got to sing lead vocals for the first time on a Kiss record. The crowd knew every word, screaming them back at him in that collective roar that turns 12,000 individual voices into one massive organism. Ace had just finished the second verse. The moment before his solo, the part everyone was waiting for. The part where Ace Frehley would prove, once again, why he was called the Spaceman. Why his solos sounded like they came from somewhere beyond Earth. He positioned his fingers on the fretboard. The crowd noise swelled in anticipation. And then Ace stopped. He lifted his hands off the guitar. Both of them. The Les Paul hung silent from its strap. The music from the rest of the band continued for exactly 2 more bars before they realized what was happening. Gene looked over. Paul turned around. Peter's drumming faltered. The music died. 12,000 people went silent. Ace Frehley stood center stage under the spotlight, his hands at his sides, his guitar hanging loose and quiet. He didn't speak. Didn't gesture. Didn't explain. He just waited. Ace didn't defend himself. He never did. To understand what happened next, you need to understand what happened 3 hours earlier. The afternoon soundcheck had been routine. The band ran through their set list. Techs adjusted levels. Everything was professional, tight, ready for the evening show. Ace had been quiet during soundcheck, but then, Ace was always quiet. That wasn't unusual. What was unusual was the conversation that happened afterward in the production office backstage. Ace had walked past the half-open door on his way to the dressing room and heard his name. He stopped. Not because he made a habit of eavesdropping, but because the tone made him pause. That particular combination of dismissiveness and certainty that people use when they think they're alone. "Look, I'm just saying the kid's got a gimmick and that's it." The voice belonged to Martin Cross, the tour production manager. A man in his 50s who'd been doing this since the Beatles played Shea Stadium. A man who'd seen 1,000 bands and believed he could spot real talent from manufactured hype. The makeup, the costume, the whole space thing, it's a show. Take that away and you've got a decent guitarist who got lucky being in the right band at the right time. Someone else laughed. Ace didn't recognize the voice. Probably one of the local production crew. "You really think he can't play?" "I think," Martin said with the confidence of experience, "that Ace Frehley is a showman. And there's nothing wrong with that. Showmen have their place. But if you put him in a room with a real session guitarist, someone who actually studied music, who can read charts, who understands theory, he'd be exposed in about 30 seconds. That seems harsh. It's realistic." The kid's 26 years old. Didn't finish high school. Taught himself guitar playing along to records. You know how many guys like that there are? Thousands. The difference is he got the costume and the pyrotechnics and the demographics lined up right. Good for him. He's making money. But let's not confuse spectacle with skill. Ace stood in the hallway outside that door for perhaps 10 seconds. His face didn't change expression. His hands didn't clench into fists. He simply listened, absorbed the words the way you absorb rain when you're caught outside without an umbrella, and then continued walking to his dressing room. He didn't tell the other band members. Didn't confront Martin. Didn't mention it to anyone. That wasn't his way. Gene Simmons once said in an interview years later, Ace never argued with words. If you questioned him, he'd show you. One note. One solo. And then he'd walk away and never mention it again. Ace Frehley sat in his dressing room for 2 hours before the show. He didn't warm up. Didn't practice scales. He just sat with his guitar across his lap, thinking about one thing. How do you prove something to someone who's already decided they know the truth? The answer came to him slowly, piece by piece, like a melody assembling itself from scattered notes. You don't prove it with spectacle. You don't prove it with explanations. You prove it by stripping everything away until only the truth remains. Away from the spotlight, Ace made a choice no one expected. When Ace walked on stage that night, he had his Les Paul, his boots, his costume, all the visual elements that Martin Cross had dismissed as gimmick. But he'd also made a decision. During Shock Me, when the moment came for his solo, the moment that thousands of people had paid to see, the moment that defined him as a guitarist, he would strip away every advantage, every effect, every piece of showmanship. He would play one solo, completely clean. No distortion. No reverb. No delay. No wah pedal. No pyrotechnics. Nothing but the guitar, the amplifier, and his hands. If Martin Cross was right, if Ace Frehley was just a showman hiding behind gimmicks, then a clean solo would expose him completely. 12,000 witnesses would hear exactly who he was without the protective coating of spectacle. And if Martin was wrong, well, then Martin would hear it too. Ace didn't tell his bandmates what he was planning. Didn't warn the sound engineer. Didn't discuss it with anyone. He just waited for the right moment. And when Shock Me hit that point, right before the solo that everyone was waiting for, Ace Frehley made his move. He stopped playing. He reached down to his pedalboard, visible to the entire front section of the arena, and clicked off every single effect pedal. One by one. The small LED lights went dark. Click. 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 The sound of each switch echoed through the arena's PA system. Then he walked to his amplifier. He reached behind it and adjusted something. The crowd couldn't see exactly what, but the guitar techs in the wings knew. He was switching to the clean channel. No distortion. No overdrive. Just pure, unprocessed signal. The arena was silent. Confused. Waiting. Ace walked back to center stage. He positioned the Les Paul. He looked out at 12,000 faces, all frozen in uncertainty, all wondering the same thing. What is happening? And then Ace Frehley played. Subscribe and leave a comment, because some moments only make sense when we remember them together. The first note was clean. Pure. No distortion to hide behind. No effects to add color. Just the fundamental sound of a guitar string vibrating and an amplifier reproducing that vibration with perfect honesty. And it was beautiful. The solo that followed wasn't about speed. Wasn't about flash. It was about tone, timing, and taste. Every note placed exactly where it needed to be. Every bend singing with emotion. Every phrase breathing like a human voice. Without the distortion, you could hear everything. The subtle variations in his attack. The way he used dynamics, playing soft in some moments, harder in others, creating waves of intensity without ever resorting to volume or effects. The melody he constructed wasn't just technically proficient, it was musical. It told a story. In the production office backstage, Martin Cross had been packing up his paperwork. He stopped. He set down the clipboard. He walked to the monitor that showed the stage feed. He watched Ace Frehley play a guitar solo with no effects, no distortion, no gimmicks. And for the first time in 30 years of working in music production, Martin Cross understood the difference between someone who plays guitar and someone who is a guitarist. The solo built, not through volume or effects, those weren't available. It built through musical intensity, through the intelligence of the note choices, through the way Ace used silence as much as sound, letting phrases breathe, giving the audience space to absorb what they were hearing. The crowd, 12,000 strong, had been confused at first, then curious, then absolutely mesmerized. This wasn't showmanship. This was mastery. When Ace hit the final note, a long, sustained bend that sang through the arena with bell-like clarity, the crowd erupted. Not the usual arena roar. Something different. Something deeper. The sound of people who'd just witnessed something they hadn't expected. Who'd seen past the costume and the makeup and the stage persona and glimpsed the real person underneath. Ace held that final note for 8 seconds. Then he let it fade naturally, no reverb tail to extend it artificially. When it was gone, he calmly walked back to his pedal board and clicked his effects back on. The LED lights came to life. He didn't smile. Didn't acknowledge what he'd just done. He simply stepped back up to the microphone and continued with the next verse of Shock Me, as if nothing unusual had happened. Paul Stanley, standing stage left, stared at him with an expression somewhere between shock and admiration. Gene Simmons, never at a loss for words on stage, said nothing. Even Peter Criss had stopped his usual between-song banter. They all understood. Ace had just proven something without saying a single word. What followed silenced everyone in the room. After the show, Ace was in his dressing room removing his makeup when there was a knock on the door. Yeah. The door opened. Martin Cross stood in the doorway. The production manager who'd dismissed Ace as a showman. Who'd said he'd be exposed in 30 seconds against a real musician. Ace looked at him in the mirror. Didn't turn around. Just waited. Martin stood there for a long moment. Then he said very quietly, "I've been doing this for 20 years. I thought I'd seen everything." Ace continued removing his makeup. Silent. "That solo tonight," Martin continued. "The clean one. That was. I need you to know that I was wrong about you." Ace finally turned around. His face was half clean, the silver paint gone from one side, revealing the ordinary human underneath. He looked at Martin Cross for 3 full seconds. Then he nodded once. That was it. No speech. No, I told you so. No demand for apology or explanation. Just one nod. Acknowledgement received. Martin started to say something else, but Ace had already turned back to the mirror. The conversation was over. Not because Ace was angry, but because there was nothing more to say. The music had said everything that mattered. Martin left. He never spoke about Ace Frehley dismissively again. And 3 months later, when the tour production team was debating whether to add more pyrotechnics to Ace's solo spot, Martin was the one who said, "The kid doesn't need it. Let him play." Years later, a young session guitarist named Tommy Vance told this story. "I was backstage at a Kiss show in '82, just starting out, scared to death. Ace saw me holding my guitar like it was going to bite me. He didn't give me a pep talk. He just said they can dress you up. They can light you up. They can put you on the biggest stage in the world. But when you're standing there with just the guitar and the air between you and them, that's when they find out who you are. Make sure you know first." Then he walked away. Best advice I ever got. The Les Paul that Ace played that night, the one he used for the clean solo in Detroit, he kept for the rest of his career. He never modified it. Never changed the pickups or upgraded the electronics. In interviews, when people asked why he stayed loyal to that particular guitar, he'd give different answers. "It sounds good. I like the feel. Why mess with what works?" But people who knew him, really knew him, understood the real reason. That guitar had been there the night he proved something without words. The night he stripped away everything and let the truth speak. It reminded him that spectacle was fun, that showmanship had its place, but that the core of who he was lived in the silence between notes, and the choices he made when no one was watching. Share and subscribe, some stories deserve to be remembered. In 2009, a music journalist tracked down Martin Cross, who was retired and living in Arizona. Asked about his career, about the thousands of shows he'd worked, about all the legendary performers he'd seen. "Who surprised you the most?" the journalist asked. Martin didn't hesitate. "Ace Frehley. Detroit. 77. I learned that night that the quietest people in rock and roll are sometimes the ones with the most to say. And they don't say it with their mouths." The journalist asked what he meant. "He played one solo," Martin said. "No effects. No tricks. Just him and the guitar. And I realized I'd spent 3 decades in this business thinking I knew how to spot real talent. I was wrong. Real talent doesn't need to defend itself. It just waits for the right moment. Then it plays." Ace Frehley never spoke publicly about that night in Detroit. Never mentioned the overheard conversation. Never told the story of why he chose to play that solo clean. But 46 years later, guitarists still talk about it. About the night Ace Frehley made an unspoken decision that silenced 12,000 people and taught one production manager that some truths don't need words. They just need one guitar, one amplifier, and hands that know what to say when the mouth stays silent.